It's Sunday lunchtime. This podcast is due out to you tomorrow, but I haven't recorded it yet because I've spent most of this week watching the Olympics when I wasn't on calls with clients. I'm telling you that partly so that you can see that all of us procrastinate. I sometimes worry that you guys think that I don't, that like I've got a total handle on all of this. The reason this podcast works and the reason my coaching works is because I am working on this stuff right alongside you. The other reason I'm telling you is because I decided to just embrace it and make this episode about what we can learn for the Olympics that applies to academia. Hello and welcome to episode 47 of season 2 of the PhD Life Coach. And today we are going to be thinking about 9 things that you can learn from watching the Olympics that you can apply into academia. Now, when I planned this, it was 8 things, but I've procrastinated so long watching the Olympics that I've come up with more things, one of which is based on the result that I just watched, and I'm still fuming. So we will get to that one in a minute. Now, many of you know that I'm a sports scientist originally. I did a sport and exercise sciences degree. I did my PhD in kind of adjacent stuff to that. And it means I've spent my entire academic career surrounded by people that really care about performance sport. Now, I don't really. That's hard to explain when I get so excited about the Olympics. I love the Olympics. I get obsessed with the Olympics. I love watching sports that I know very little about and suddenly declaring myself an expert in it. I love the drama. I just love everything about the Olympics. I don't take it that seriously though. And I think that's one of the reasons I love it so much is that I can get really into all the fun of it and all the excitement, but I'm not that devastated if it doesn't go right. I've heard enough sports scientists over the years talk about, performance increments and how medals are everything and and all that. And I'm like, yeah, I don't get it. That's not how I feel about it, but it is super exciting. But I also think that these sorts of performance environments, whether it's high-level sport, high-level music, high-level anything, I think they all have things in common that we can translate between different settings, right? And you guys know there's been a few episodes over the last couple of years where I've done things. I've learned playing Stardew Valley and all sorts of random things. If you haven't listened to that one, by the way, it's good. Go back, find it, even if you don't play Stardew. I like learning lessons in one environment, applying them in another. And the more I was watching the Olympics, the more I was seeing things that I could share with you guys. So here we go on my 9 lessons from the Olympics for academia. I am going to confess right up front that this lesson is directly inspired by a blog post by Professor Jen Cumming, where she talked about how people can define success differently in the Olympics. Now, this was inspired for her by watching Adam Peaty get a silver and have many people describe this in the context of him losing gold, him not achieving his goals. Yet when he was actually interviewed, he was very much focusing on how being at the Olympics was a victory for him, having got back into training for an Olympics, how getting back into that whole lifestyle after the many difficulties that he's had was a win in and of itself. If you want to read the blog in full, I will link to it in the show notes. This was one that was done for the University of Birmingham for their website as part of their Olympics coverage. But I'll also link to the Sprint project, which Jen leads on, where they have a whole series of blogs about how sports psychology can be applied to a whole variety of other settings. So do make sure you check that out. And that blog and watching the Olympics myself just really got me thinking about how different people define success. Some people talk about silver being the first loser and that I'm only here for gold. Other people are just happy to be there or happy with what they get. But I think it also goes beyond what's good enough in a performance sense. I think there's a whole variety of other ways that you can define success. Success can be defined in the relationships that you make with the people on your team or even the people you're playing against. Success can be defined in what else you set up in your life. So I, along with many, many other people, have been following, along with many of you, I'm sure, Ilona Mayer, the US Sevens rugby player, who is hilarious and an absolute goddess on Instagram. Cracks me up. If you're not following her, make sure you do. And they got a bronze. They didn't win, But she has absolutely won in many ways in terms of coverage and positive press and inspiring people to get involved in women's rugby, to showing young girls and women that they can be big and strong and powerful and still feminine and fun and exciting. And that is a whole other version of success. And I think in academia, we sometimes can get a really narrow view about what success means. Success means publication in certain journals. Success means grant income. It means particular roles. And all of those things do help progression, but there are a variety of different ways that you can define success in academia. Your success, in fact, my success, was much more defined in terms of what the students I've worked with have gone on and done, and the experience I gave them, and the cards that I got thanking me for the support that I gave them during their degrees. That was more important to me, and I think much more influential to the world than the research that I did, to be honest. Other people will define success in terms of the impact that they have through their research. So not whether it was published in the top journal ever, but whether it got translated into policy or into something tangible that people could see out there in the world. If you can think about how you define success and what's truly meaningful for you, then you can start to plan and guide yourself towards those versions of success, and perhaps even spend less time worrying about what other people's versions of success might look like. The second lesson I want to draw from the Olympics is how you deal with setbacks. Setbacks happen all the time in professional sport. Sometimes they happen at a moment where you can do something about it. For example, I saw one of I think it was a Norwegian high bar gymnast, partway through his routine, his handguard snapped and he fell off, and he was given the opportunity to go again. And imagine what that's like. You're falling off, you've crashed to the floor. It was a pretty heavy fall. And he had that opportunity to get back up, redo that move, and then continue and finish his piece. How he responds to something like that could vary hugely between different people. One place I saw it that was really pronounced was in the BMX freestyle thingy. That's probably not his technical name. I don't know what it's actually called, but where they're in like the dish and they've got like the mounds and the slopes up the sides and they're going around on their BMXs like a bunch of teenagers, and they like go up and flip and do all sorts of cool stuff. Those ones. I was watching the women in that and they were amazing. And they were down to the last couple of people, and somebody had put quite a good score up, but the last two to go were expected to do better. And the Chinese woman who came up next was doing some incredible stuff, like way better than the other person who was currently in the lead. And then she crashed. And I'm not quite sure what happened because I don't know anything about BMX, but it was very exciting. And she crashed. And as soon as she crashed, she got back up, she picked up her bike, knowing that she'd lost the gold medal. There was no way that she was going to be able to get the medal having crashed like that. And she just did a whole load more tricks just to show the world what she could do. And I loved that response to a setback, that her first thought was, I want to show them my tricks anyway. And she just cracked on and did it. In contrast, the next person, when they then also crashed, it was a very crashy final. It was some drama. And when they also crashed, they just stopped and thanked the crowd. Now, I'm not going to criticize them for that, because who knows, they might be injured. Their bike must have been broken. They might be saving themselves for something else. They might be looking after their own mental health. Who knows why they stopped? So I'm not going to judge, but it was a very different response to the Chinese athlete. And we get to choose how we respond to setbacks. We get to choose what is in our best interest. So one of those athletes chose in that moment that it was in her best interest to carry on and do the tricks, and another chose that it wasn't. And they will get to decide whether they made the right decision there in the moment. And sometimes looking after yourself after a setback is absolutely the right decision. When I was watching the BMX racing, which I also know nothing about, but it's very exciting, they were talking about how one of the guys had broken his wrist in a previous competition, and instead of stopping, he'd just got his coach to strap his hand to the handlebar to keep going. Now, I am not going to romanticize his commitment to BMX. I think that's bonkers. Ridiculous idea. We all, though, get to decide When do we push through setbacks? When do we give ourselves space to recover and mourn and grieve what we didn't do, look after our health? And what I would encourage you to do is to try and decide, how do I want to respond to these things? What is in my best interest right now in the moment? And what is in my best interest in the long term? And surround yourself by people who will support you in that. Because sometimes when a setback happens, the right thing to do is get back up and try again immediately. Just get on it, because it's not a big deal and you can keep going. And other times, the right way to respond to a setback is to take some time to rest and recover. And sometimes we need someone else to tell us that. Sometimes we think our only option is to push through. Our only option is to strap our hand to the BMX handle and keep going. I think that person should have had a coach saying, stop, just stop now. You don't have to do this. Okay. Surround yourself by people who will push you when it's in your best interest to be pushed, and who will stop you when it's better for you to rest and recover and recuperate. My third lesson really connects to that, and it relates to the GOAT herself, Simone Biles, who I'm a tiny bit in love with. She's amazing. And if you're not familiar with gymnastics, in the Tokyo Olympics, she got the twisties partway through one of her routines. And what that means is she lost track of where she was in the air. And as you can imagine, if you're doing these big twisting somersaults, that's terrifying. If you're suddenly 3 meters in the air and you don't know which way is up and down. And she took time out, and she was very open about the fact that she needed to take time out for her mental health and to figure out what was happening with this balance issue that she had developed. And I just think it's a really important lesson that must have been an incredibly hard thing to do, to take that time out, to step away and risk. She didn't know whether she could come back. She didn't know how long she would be away for, but she knew that was in her best interest. And having taken that time out, not only has she now come back and done amazingly well, she's come back and is helping to change the nature of the sport. Those of you who, there's probably not many people who have watched gymnastics for as long as I have, but the change in how the gymnasts relate to each other within teams and between teams since I started watching in the 80s to now has been just astonishing. They used to compete with injuries. They wouldn't speak to each other in rotations. They certainly wouldn't console each other. And yet we see the Canadian gymnast consoling a French gymnast who wasn't going to make it through to the team final, all of this stuff. And I do think that partly the high profile kindness that Simone Biles showed to herself has allowed other people to show kindness to themselves. And when you show kindness to yourself, you can show it to other people as well. So the third lesson is that taking time out, doing the right thing for yourself, not only can help your own performance in the future, but more importantly, it can change the climate around you. It can show other people that it's okay to do those things too. My fourth lesson is that success and failure can be a really tiny distance apart. I was watching the rowing, and within 24 hours, Team GB had won some races by like 0.2 of a second and had lost other races by 0.2 of a second. And it just struck me how much when we lose by 0.2 of a second, we focus on, oh my God, I was so close. It's not fair. It was awful. Not saying those athletes did. I think they responded super professionally. But inside our heads, the tendency is to be like, if only I'd just Whereas when we win by that distance, it's like, oh my God, I'm Olympic champion. That's amazing. And I think my lesson here is that in academia, there's often small margins in things too. You know, when you're scored really high on a grant and then you don't get it because a few other people just got scored a tiny bit higher, but your grant was essentially amazing, it's really hard to swallow. But when we can remember that those small margins go both ways and that we can't take it too seriously either way, that when we win by a small margin, lucky us, happy days. It doesn't mean that we're unstoppable. It doesn't mean that we're some academic legend. It's like, you know what? Good. I did a good job. Happy days. Let's go. And when we miss by a small target, almost all of that is still true. I did a good job. I wrote a good article. I wrote a good grant. Not my day today. When we recognize that it's small margins in both directions, I think it can be a little easier just to keep some perspective on what it actually means. My fifth one, and this is the one I added. This is the one I'm fuming about right now. This wasn't going to be here, but I just watched the GB men. GB lost. We managed to draw with India, who they're great players, don't get me wrong, amazing team, but they'd had a man sent off, they'd had a man sin binned, so we're 2 men up at this point, and somehow we still don't manage to score before the final whistle, which meant we had to go to the penalty shootout thing. And you don't want to be in a penalty shootout against India because their stick work's amazing and their goalkeeper is an absolute beast. He's awesome. So good. And we lost. And it was rubbish. And the first thing that I got was a phone call from my stepdad going, what was that? They need to learn to play the team they're playing. And I just thought that was such an interesting comment, that they need to learn to play the team I'm playing. What sometimes happens with team sports is that they plan in advance all their plays, their strategies, how it's going to work. And they don't have either the autonomy or the confidence or the skill, decision-making skill, to change that strategy when they need to. And we see this a lot. My stepdad was ranting away. This is what happens in football. This is what happened with rugby. Now, whether you agree with that or not, I think it really brings some interesting parallels in academia as well. Sometimes we get very caught up in this is how this project's going to be, or this is how my academic year is going to go. And when things start to be not figuring out the way we thought they were going to, an opportunity to do something else comes up, or perhaps you have ethical issues or access issues that mean that a project's not going the way you thought it would, suddenly you have to make decisions about whether you're going to pivot, whether you're going to change your approach or not. And the more we can be mindful of those decisions, more we can be aware when the playing field has changed, when the team we're playing, in inverted commas, has changed, the more we can then decide whether we should still be sticking to plan A or whether we should be pivoting to something else. Quick interjection. If you're finding today's session useful, but you're driving or walking the dog or doing the dishes, I want you to do one thing for me after you've finished. Go to my website, phdlifecoach.com, and sign up for my newsletter. We all know that we listen to podcasts and we think, oh, this is really, really useful, I should do that. And then we don't end up doing it. My newsletter is designed specifically to help you make sure you actually use the stuff that you hear here. So every week you'll get a quick summary of the podcast, you'll get some reflective questions, and you'll get one action that you can take immediately to start implementing the things we've talked about. My newsletter community also have access to 1 session a month of online group coaching, which is completely free, but you have to be on the email list to get access. They're also the first to hear when there's spaces on my one-to-one coaching or when there are other programs and workshops that you can get involved with. So after you've listened, or even right now, make sure you go and sign up. My 6th lesson is that you should always run your own race. I coach a lot of PhD students, and one of the things I really see is they're very mindful of where their cohort are at, that they're the last in their cohort to submit, whatever it is. And I think it's super important to remember that we all run our own races in academia. They're different courses, they're different lengths sometimes. But where this came out in the Olympics was watching the men's triathlon, and the British guy, who everybody had really high hopes for, was in 2nd place behind the New Zealander. And the French guy, I think it was, in 3rd, was rapidly gaining on him. And the commentators were starting to get proper stress that he was going to get caught by the French guy and was going to lose his bronze medal. And those of you who watched it live will remember the shots of the TV were rubbish. And so all of a sudden, they cut back to him and he was like catching up with the New Zealand guy. The French guy was nowhere to be seen. He was catching up with the guy in the lead. And then went past him, and the New Zealand guy had nothing left, and he went on to win the gold medal. And it just really strikes me. My husband and I were discussing it afterwards, that knowing how much you have left and deciding when you're going to like kick it up and run faster is hugely skillful. Whatever stage of academia you're in, you are in your own race. You get to decide when is a time where you push forward and try and go faster. When is a time where you bide your time, get your breath back, ready for the next push. You have your own race. You get to make your own strategic choices at all the different places, and you get to see where it takes you. And that leads me on to the 7th, which is one of the things that I have enjoyed watching at these Olympics, more than at any other Olympics, I think, is the extent to which people are celebrating each other's successes. We saw at the end of that triathlon, the New Zealander who had just been beaten into 2nd place The first thing he did was came up, sat next to the British athlete, put his arm around him and congratulated him. We've seen the cheers and celebrations on all of the gymnasts' faces when they've seen their competitors successfully land amazing moves. When you can celebrate the achievements of the people around you, even if it's people who are in direct competition to each other, it creates an environment that's so much more fun to work in, so much more fun to try and succeed in, and so much easier to fall short in if you know that the people around you will support you when you feel short and that you will be super proud of them when they do well. It's just a nicer place to be. My 8th lesson has been inspired by pretty much everyone, but I'm going to attribute it to Max Whitlock. Max Whitlock is the British gymnast who came back for his 3rd Olympic Games. He'd had 2 gold medals previously. He wanted to defend his gold medal on the pommel horse, and he came 4th. But when they asked him how he felt about not defending his gold, he was obviously really disappointed. But he said, yes, I was working towards a gold medal. That was my goal. But the point wasn't the gold medal. The point was the journey it takes to get to where I have the opportunity to compete for the gold medal. And it reminded me a lot of something that Brooke Castillo, who runs the life coach school where I trained as a life coach, once said in a podcast, which I just thought was amazing, which is that the goal isn't getting there. The goal is being here, creating it. And when I think of everybody who's gone to the Olympics, whether they've come last or got injured or been disqualified, or whether they've gone on and won their Olympic gold, the real win here is who they have had to become in order to be there. What skills and determination and emotional regulation they have had to develop in order to do all the training it takes to get there, to be at the Olympics, to take part. With any goal, if it's only a successful goal, if you get the thing at the end, you're setting yourself up for massive potential failures. Whereas if you can say this goal and the fact I want this goal is what is going to motivate me to become a person who could win that, to become somebody who does the work needed to win that, then regardless of whether it comes off at the end, regardless of those marginal gaps that I talked about that determine whether you get 1st or 3rd or 4th, regardless of that, you have still become a person that can be there competing. You've still become a person who had the potential to win a medal. And this is so true in academia too. If you are only going to be happy when you get to your PhD or when you get to your grant or you get to your professorship or whatever it is, we spend many years in misery and you don't know whether you're going to achieve those things or not, especially the stuff that's competitive, like getting jobs. You don't know. But if we can revel in the process, revel in the person that we're becoming, then you can win every time. Because regardless of whether you achieve the goal or not, the bit that's in your control, the becoming that person, is happening every day. My 9th and final lesson is different. I didn't learn it by watching the Olympics. I learned it about myself, which has enabled me to watch this Olympics. And that is, you have to know yourself. So I was doing my quarterly planning. So those of you who listen regularly know that I have a monthly planning system, a quarterly planning system. I teach it within my membership. I was planning my quarter at the beginning of July. So I do quarters in the calendar year. So it's July, August, September. And I knew that the Olympics fell right in the middle of that. And I know that I'm obsessed with the Olympics. In the past, what I've done is I've told myself I should be working, that I can't just take time off to watch the Olympics, I should be working. And then I've not really ended up doing either very well. I've ended up trying to get important work done with the Olympics on, feeling guilty about the fact I'm watching Olympics, occasionally missing Olympics, but usually missing work, not going to lie. So when I was doing my quarterly planning, I was like, you know what? I have to plan for the version of me that I know will show up. And if you haven't listened to last week's podcast where Dr. Alison Miller talks about that in more detail, please make sure you do. But I knew that during July and August, I was going to show up as somebody who's highly distracted by the Olympics. And so I planned for that. I've had my meetings, I've had my coaching calls and all that stuff. I've had my membership sessions. But other than that, my only goals have been little admin-y things, sorting out stuff that takes a bit of time, but that crucially I can do in front of the Olympics. So I have worked probably a bit shorter hours than I normally would have done, and I don't feel guilty about that, and I've entirely planned for it. And I've got done things that I could do at the same time as watching the Olympics. So I planned for how I knew I would show up. And that means instead of feeling bad that I was wasting my time watching the Olympics, I know this was literally the plan. You literally planned to be able to watch this stuff, get these little bitty jobs done. And once the Olympics are done, we crack on with content creation. So when you're planning, know yourself. If you hate getting up first thing in the morning and you're slow until 9, why do you keep telling yourself you should start work at 7? Pointless. Pointless, because all you do is start every day feeling like a failure. Find a balance where you plan for the version of you that's most likely to show up and make that the best version of you. I'm having a really good week because I planned realistically instead of with a kind of hypothetical, never actually going to exist, focused Vicky who doesn't really watch the Olympics until the evening. Plan compassionately, plan specifically for you. I really hope you all found that useful. After the Olympics is over, I am going to dive straight into content creation because I am turning all of my workshops that I currently offer live for universities, and I still will be, so tell your universities if you want them. I'm turning all of them into little self-paced courses that you guys will be able to purchase off the shelf if your universities don't pay for the workshops themselves. So do keep a little eye out for that. So as soon as that closing ceremony is done, my excuses for not getting on with my writing are over. I'm going to be recording, I'm going to be writing, and there is going to be a ton of stuff for you in September. I'm really, really looking forward to doing it. If you are listening and you're not on my mailing list, make sure that you sign up so that you get told about all of those things when they become available. If you think your university should have one of my workshops, this is a really good time to let them know. They're starting to plan the years. I'm already booked into several universities. I'm booked in to go and do like keynotes at induction events and things like that. If you want me for any of those things, give me a shout. My September and October are filling up. So let me know as soon as you can. If you are watching the Olympics as well, enjoy. We have so much exciting stuff still to come. I'm looking forward to the canoe cross, whatever that involves. I've been loving the mixed relay. I'd love to know what you guys think about that. Send me what you're looking forward to in the Olympics so I can make sure that I watch that stuff too. I hope you found today useful. Thank you for listening and see you next week.